Hello everybody, I'm going to read to you the first chapter from the book James's Journey. I hope you enjoy it. James's Journey, Chapter 1, Downhill. Cool! Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Can I try it out now, please? Sorry, but it'll be getting dark soon. You'll have to wait until tomorrow. Please? Tomorrow. The look on his mother's face told him not to push it. He took his new bike to the garage with his father. Will you help me tomorrow, Dad? Sure, son, he said, ruffling the light brown hair. James smiled up at his dad, and they walked back into the house to get ready for a light supper. It had been a great party, and the best had been saved till last. His first bicycle ever, a bright red shiny bicycle. Sometimes he'd felt like the only 11-year-old who didn't know how to ride a bicycle yet. No one knew for sure, of course. He always managed to have something else to do when the other boys went on a bicycle spree. Someone always tried to tease him about it. I bet he doesn't even know how to ride a bike. He never comes with us. Others knew that his family didn't have much money and didn't bother him. That night he dreamt of racing with other boys on his brand new bicycle and gliding hands-free with a cool breeze blowing in his face. For the next couple of weeks, James spent every free minute learning how to ride his new bicycle. He drove his parents round the bend. Still, they were happy for him. They knew how much it meant to him and were glad they had finally been able to make his wish come true. James lived near a wood, and one day, not much later, feeling confident of his progress, he decided to risk a steeper hill than usual at the far end of the wood. He hesitated, as he knew he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the wood on his own. If anything happened, he'd probably never see his bicycle again. He took a deep breath and pushed off. As he accelerated, he began to panic. The little dirt road was steeper than he'd expected. Faster and faster the bicycle went. It hadn't seemed like such a long way when he'd looked from the top, and he wondered when it would come to an end. Finally he was out of the wood. Still the road went on. Not much further, he thought, as he stared ahead, relieved that the road would soon straighten out. He had just slowed down when he saw a hole in the road. Too late. The front wheel went right in it, and James flew over the handlebars and hit the ground. "Ah!" he shouted, as he scraped his knees and scratched his hands before rolling over, bruising himself everywhere. He lay there for a few minutes, catching his breath and feeling sorry for himself. As he got up to check his bike, he hoped he could still ride it back home, but when he saw how the front wheel was bent, he just groaned and thought about how far he would have to push it. He looked back up the hill and groaned again, then turned and peered in the opposite direction. Not too far away, he saw what looked like houses, and wondered if he could get the wheel fixed or find someone to give him a lift home. Ask a stranger to give him a lift home? His parents wouldn't like that. What was he thinking? He was already in a load of trouble. On the other hand, what more could happen? He decided to risk it, and started pushing his bike to what he thought might be a village or small town. As he grew nearer, he thought he might have knocked his head without realizing it, 'cause there seemed to be something wrong with his eyes, or he was dizzy or something. The houses seemed to have an odd shape. The tree trunks were green, and the branches didn't have any leaves, although it was the beginning of summer. He tried to focus, but it didn't seem to make any difference. Closer, closer. His eyes grew wider and wider. He must be unconscious and dreaming. He stopped and stared. The trees were upside down. There were the roots up in the air, and sticking out of the ground were a few branches with leaves here and there. He examined them closer. Huh? The trunks were actually painted green. Why would anyone paint tree trunks green? He looked back the way he had come, but he couldn't see the wood any more. He gazed at the houses. They were like upside-down triangles. Well, almost. Every house had 3 floors, which got wider as you went up. The first floor had 1 window, the second 2, and the third floor had a door in the middle, with a window on each side of it. He heard a door open in one of the nearby houses, and watched as someone pulled down a ladder which was above the door and climbed down it. Other houses had slides from the door to the ground, and he wondered how they got back up. Maybe they climbed through the windows on the bottom floor, he thought. Just as he was about to walk on, all the houses, which had been facing in one direction, unexpectedly rotated a few degrees to the left. James was so shocked, he let go of his bicycle and jumped backward, screaming, "What the? I must be dreaming," he said. He waited a minute, then picked up his bike again and walked a few more meters before reaching what he hoped was a shop. Strangely enough, the door was on the ground floor. He leaned his bike against the wall and dashed through the door, just in case the buildings decided to rotate again. Once inside, he drew a sigh of relief and took a look around to see what weird things he might find. Nothing. It seemed to be a normal shop, but no one was there. Just as he was about to call out, he heard someone humming in a back room. Then a woman came out, walking on her hands. Her long dress seemed to be closed at the bottom, with 2 holes for the legs, so it would stay put when walking on her hands. Once behind the counter, the woman stood on her feet again. She had a beard and a moustache. The woman was, in fact, a man. "Bad morning, young man," he smiled. "A little, yes. Are you practicing for a play or a circus act or something?" The man regarded James questioningly. "It's just that you're wearing a dress and you were walking on your hands," James explained. "So?" James thought maybe the man wasn't quite normal, so he changed the subject. "Nothing. Sorry. I was wondering if there was a bicycle repair shop somewhere. I had an accident and my front wheel needs fixing." "Bicycle?" James was relieved when the shop door opened and someone else came in, until he saw that this person was also walking on his hands. This time it was a woman in a man's shirt and trousers. "I bet these people are acrobats," James thought. "How are you today, Mr. Shop?" "Not good, not good. And you, Mrs. Store?" "Reasonably bad." "I see we have a customer," she said, now standing beside Mr. Shop. "Yes, but I'm not sure what he wants." "Let me try. How may we help you?" James was still musing on why they were smiling about feeling bad, and didn't hear the question. "What's right, boy?" asked Mrs. Storr. "Huh?" He was slowly coming back to his senses. "Is something right, boy?" "Right? Actually something's wrong." "Oh, that's okay then." "Okay? No, I need help getting back home. I had a little accident on my bicycle, and I'd like to know where I can repair it, please." "You had an accident on your what?" "My bicycle. The front wheel's all bent." "Bicycle? What's that? A double-bladed sickle?" James felt as confused as they looked. "Well, let me show you." Mrs. Storr, along with Mr. Shop, got on their hands and followed him outside. "You're quite bad on your feet," said Mrs. Storr admiringly. Thank you, I think. And you're quite bad on your hands." James had figured out that the words good and bad and right and wrong meant the opposite here. "Well, of course, it's normal, isn't it?" said Mr. Shop, giving James a disapproving look. James chose not to comment on that. "This is my bike." "I thought you said it was a bicycle," retorted Mr. Shop, eyeing it as if he were afraid it might suddenly bite him. "Yes, bike is short for bicycle." Mrs. Storr was examining the bicycle with dancing eyes. "I've seen one of these before," she said, "many years ago. A stranger passed through on one. I was 10. He was a couple of years older and very nice. I think he was lost. Anyway, we became friends and he took me for a ride on his bicycle. Will you take me for a ride on yours?" James was sorry he had to disappoint her. She looked so excited. "Well, as I was saying, the wheel, yes, it's broken. Well, I'm afraid we can't help you with that, love. You'll just have to go back home, wherever that is, and fix it there. But can't someone take me back up the hill?" "What hill, dear?" James pointed in the direction he'd come from. "There are no hills there." "But I just came down one." "You can't have. There are only fields there." "But—" "Enough of this nonsense," growled Mr. Shop. "There are no hills. Now you just keep walking along this road until you get to Mr. Fixit's place. If anyone can help you, he can. Now run along." He seemed to be in a hurry to get rid of him. James picked up his bicycle, glanced at Mrs. Storr, who smiled encouragingly, "You'll be all wrong, dear," and walked off muttering, "I'm sure I will." He walked for a few minutes, occupied with his own thoughts, until a little boy of about 7 or 8 almost collided with him after sliding down from the door of his house. James dropped his bike. "Sorry," said the little boy. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. "It's a bicycle. Can you tell me where Mr. Fixit is? Mr. Shop said he might be able to help me with this." He pointed at the crooked wheel. "Sure." He stuck his hands in his pockets and began whistling. After a few steps, James noticed something. "You're walking on your feet." The boy grinned. "I've been practicing. I can do it worse than anyone else here," he said proudly. "You're pretty bad yourself. What's your name?" "James. And you?" "Simon." He went back to whistling. A minute later the houses rotated again, making James jump once more. Simon giggled. "Why do they do that?" "The sun," answered Simon matter-of-factly. "What?" "Well, the sun moves, doesn't it?" Simon began. "Not really. It's Earth that revolves around the sun." "Earth doesn't move, silly. The sun comes up over there, and goes down over there." He pointed to the east, then the west. James thought, "Sure, why wouldn't it?" and shrugged his shoulders. Simon continued, "So the houses turn to the left so that the sun always shines through the windows. Aren't there windows on the other sides of the houses? Why should there be? So that the houses don't have to turn. Why shouldn't the houses turn?" "Well, because they're houses," James said, exasperated. Simon shrugged his shoulders and stopped walking. "Here's Mr. Fixit's." Mr. Fixit's was full of broken ladders and slides. Mr. Fixit himself was sitting at a desk, writing. He rather resembled Einstein. He raised his eyes. "What is it today, Simon?" he asked with a twinkle in his eyes. "This is James. He needs his bicycle fixed." "Bicycle," corrected James. Mr. Fixit peered curiously at the thing James was holding. "Leave it here for a couple of hours, and I'll see what I can do. Of course, you want this wheel," indicating the back wheel, "to look like this one," indicating the front wheel, he said wisely. "No, I want the front wheel to look like the back wheel." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." I see. Of course. Don't worry. It'll look as bad as old once I've finished with it." James thought it probably would. However, he didn't have much choice. He walked out of the repair shop with Simon and looked around forlornly. "Is there a telephone around here?" "A telephone? What's that?" "Oh, never mind," James sighed. "Want to go to the lake?" Simon asked hopefully. He had nothing better to do. "Sure." He walked beside Simon, who was whistling again. "Simon? Why are the tree trunks painted green?" "To match the grass." "Oh, and how do you all get into your houses?" "We use the ladders, of course." "But not all the houses have ladders." "Of course they do." "Your house doesn't. You came down the slide." "The ladder's under the doormat. It comes up when you step on the mat." Just then they passed a building that had neither a ladder nor a slide. Someone was jumping on a trampoline. Then he dived through a window on the second floor. There was not a door nor a window on the ground floor. "That's the bank," explained Simon. It was twice as big as the houses, but had the same structure. "My father works there." There were many people around on their hands now. They seemed to be approaching the city centre. Simon turned left, leaving all the buildings behind. At last they reached the lake. It wasn't very big. Still, it seemed like everybody there was having fun. Some were swimming, some sunbathing, playing ball, eating ice cream, and some were diving. They didn't use a diving board or jump off a tree branch. Nope, they used a catapult. They flew through the air shrieking and laughing before landing with a huge splash in the water. James watched in amazement as one after the other shot upwards, then plummeted towards the surface of the lake. "Well, come on. You do want to try it, don't you?" Simon was already stripped to his trunks. I'm not wearing any swimming trunks," James answered lamely. "We'll get you some from the shop." "Yeah, okay." Not at all sure he was doing the right thing, he bought a pair of trunks and joined the line at the catapult with Simon. "Are you sure this is safe?" James asked worriedly. "It must hurt when you hit the water like that." "Not at all. Just wait. You'll see. It's great." James became increasingly nervous as they moved closer to the catapult. As Simon sat on the catapult ready to be shot into the sky, he grinned gleefully at James. James felt his stomach turn. No sooner was Simon in the water than he was sitting down himself. He would have run off if he didn't think he would have died of shame instead. He closed his eyes, prayed it would be over quickly. Then he was going up, up, up. He held his breath. He was flying. Through his fear, a glorious feeling of freedom seeped through his body. He opened his eyes. It was unbelievable. The sky was a beautiful clear blue, and he could see the tops of trees. He slowed down and gradually began to descend. He glanced down, gasped, and squeezed his eyes shut again. Ah! He waited for the moment he would hit the water, dread filling him again. It seemed like ages, and he couldn't make up his mind whether that was a good thing or not. Finally he felt it, but it didn't hurt at all. The water was warm and soft. He knew you couldn't really describe water like that. Even so, that's how it felt. It was wonderful, absolutely marvelous. He got back to the surface. He caught his breath, blinked a couple of times, looked around, then all of a sudden began laughing. He laughed and laughed as if he had gone mad. He heard Simon calling him, turned until he could see him, waved and ended his laughter with a loud yippee before swimming energetically to shore. "Well, how'd you like it?" asked Simon as James reached him. James grinned, grabbed Simon's hand and said, "Let's go again," and off they ran. Simon fell down a couple of times as they ran because, though he was very good at walking on his feet, he hadn't yet quite mastered running. An hour later they lay on the beach panting. "I'm starving," said James. "Me too," said Simon. "We'll go to my house and make sandwiches." They dried off in the sun, went to Simon's house, up the ladder, ate, slid down the slide, which James thought was cool, and picked up James's bicycle, which Mr. Fix-It had repaired relatively well. They stood outside the shop, and James pondered what to do next. He thought the best thing to do would be to go back the way he'd come, even though Mr. Shop and Mrs. Store had insisted there were no hills there. "Well, I should be getting back home now," said James, mounting his bike. "Thank you for everything, Simon. I had a great time." "Me too," said Simon. "But you know you can't go that way, don't you?" he added, just as James was about to push off. "Why not?" "Well, there are just fields that way." "There must be something after the fields." "No, anybody who goes there just fades away into nothingness. Nobody's ever come back." "But that's impossible. I came from there. There's the hill I came down, and before that the wood, and I'm telling you there's nothing there. But if you want to fade away into nothingness, that's up to you. If I were you, I'd go that way." "But that's the opposite direction." Simon shrugged, said goodbye, and headed home, hands in his pockets and whistling. "Hey, Simon! Where will I be if I go that way?" But Simon didn't hear him. James turned his bicycle around and rode through the city until he came to a river. He couldn't see any bridges, so he decided to ride alongside the river until he found one. An hour later he still hadn't come across any bridges, and the view on the other side of the river hadn't changed. It seemed like whatever was on the other side was shrouded in a kind of bluish mist, so it looked like part of the sky. He could swim across, of course. The water was hardly moving. But what about his bike? He was too tired to go all the way back and try his luck in the other direction, so he sat down to rest and think. 15 minutes later, just as he was about to continue in the hope of either meeting someone or finding somewhere to spend the night, or even crossing a bridge, he saw something in the distance moving from one side of the river to the other. He quickly mounted his bike and pedaled as fast as he could towards the moving object. He just got there in time to see someone disappearing into the mist. He searched for the boat that must have carried the person over, yet saw nothing remotely close to resembling a boat. He moaned, and then, in a sudden burst of anger, picked up a stone and threw it into the river. The stone bounced across the surface of the water, floated for a few seconds, then sank slowly to the bottom. "That's strange," thought James. "It's not the first time anyone's ever bounced a stone on the water, but I've never seen a stone float before." He picked up another one and threw it. It reacted in exactly the same way. He tried another and another, each time using a bigger stone. It made no difference. He picked up the heaviest stone he could and watched it do the same, except for the fact that it didn't go as far as the others because he couldn't throw it hard enough. He crouched down and hesitantly touched the water. It felt like usual. Then, with sudden daring, he raised his hand and brought it down hard in order to make a big splash. His hand just bounced back and hit him in the face, knocking him backwards. James lay on the ground for a moment, stunned. Then he got up again and tried putting his foot in. He put some weight on the first foot, then followed it with the other. He walked in a little circle, stopped, said, "Ha!" and went to get his bicycle. He preferred not to risk too much by actually riding the bicycle. Instead, he walked with it by his side. When he was 2/3 of the way there, he stopped to look around. He couldn't believe he was actually walking on water. He grinned, raised a hand in the air and waved. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am the greatest magician of all times. Yes, I know. James the Great felt himself sinking, and quickly continued his crossing to the other side. Phew! That was close. He was face to face with the mist now. He took a deep breath and marched on. That's the end of chapter 1 of James's journey. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.